Yo, pause everything. Because what just hit the timeline has people gasping, clutching pearls, and refreshing their feeds like rent is due. 1 minute it was quiet. Too quiet. And the next. Boom. The Braxton family drama went nuclear. And this time, it's not just messy feelings or shady interviews. It's whispers of a secret so heavy it allegedly left Tamar in tears. Now let me say this real clear before we go any further. Everything you're about to hear is alleged, straight from the streets, the timelines, and those close to the situation sources that always seem to know a little too much. But according to what's circulating, Towanda may have crossed a line that you don't uncross. We're talking private conversations, personal revelations, a so-called truth that was never meant to leave the family circle. And Tamar, baby, sources say she wasn't just upset, she was emotionally wrecked. Like, blindsided in the worst way. The kind of hurt that hits different when it comes from your own blood. Add in a certain name from outside the family, a rumored health scare that nobody was prepared for, and suddenly this isn't just family drama, it's a full-blown crisis. Social media is already choosing sides. The comments are on fire. And everybody's asking the same thing. Why now, and why like this? Alright, so let's rewind a little, because none of this happened in a vacuum. The Braxton sisters have always been complicated. Love, rivalry, loyalty, resentment, all wrapped up in one last name. We watched it for years on TV. The tears, the blow-ups, the reconciliations that never really stuck. But what the cameras showed was only the polished version. The real fractures. Those stayed off-screen, until now. According to people who claim they've been close to the family for years, this latest situation didn't start with one argument or one leak. It was a slow burn. Old wounds that never healed. Conversations that were supposed to stay private. Feelings that were swallowed instead of addressed. And when you do that long enough, eventually something explodes. The word going around is that Towanda had been sitting on information for a while. Not gossip. Not opinions. But things that were shared in confidence. Moments where Tamar allegedly let her guard down as a sister, not as a celebrity. And that's what makes this hurt cut deeper than anything we've seen before. Because when you trust family, you don't expect them to ever use your vulnerability as ammunition. Now, allegedly, whatever was revealed wasn't dropped all at once. It came out in pieces. Little hints here. Side comments there. Enough for people to start connecting dots. And once the internet senses blood in the water, it's over. Bloggers start digging. Comment sections start speculating. And suddenly a situation that should have been handled behind closed doors is being dissected by strangers who don't know the full story, but feel entitled to an opinion anyway. Sources claim Tamar found out the same way a lot of people do these days. Not from a phone call, not from a warning, but from the timeline. Imagine scrolling and realizing something deeply personal, something you trusted your own sister with, is now being whispered about publicly. That kind of shock doesn't just make you angry. It makes you question everything. And here's where it gets even more uncomfortable. Because once Tamar's name was back in the headlines, other old rumors started resurfacing. You know how the internet does. One story opens the door, and suddenly everything walks in uninvited. Past relationships. Questionable friendships. Situations people thought had already been buried. One name in particular kept popping up, and folks started asking why. According to the chatter, there had already been tension around that connection for a while. People saying they felt uncomfortable. People claiming they warned Tamar to be careful. But at the time, it was brushed off. We're just friends. You're reaching. It's not like that. Until suddenly, the narrative shifted. Now, I want to be very clear here. What's circulating right now is rumor, reaction, and speculation layered on top of real emotions. But the streets are saying that when Towanda allegedly spoke on certain details, it wasn't just embarrassing. It was triggering. It reopened something Tamar had allegedly been trying to process privately. And instead of support, she got exposure. Meanwhile, the rest of the family, reportedly stuck in the middle. Some trying to stay neutral. Some quietly picking sides. Some just praying this doesn't turn into something that can't be taken back. Because once something is said out loud, especially on the internet, you don't get to control how far it travels. And that's the part nobody talks about enough. This isn't just about who said what. It's about timing, intent, and impact. Why now? Why let this surface when emotions were already fragile? Was it frustration? Was it retaliation? Or was it simply someone being careless with information that was never theirs to share? Whatever the answer is, one thing is clear: the dynamic between Tamar and Towanda has shifted. Trust doesn't crack loudly, it fractures quietly, and then one day it's just gone. And from the outside looking in, it feels like we're watching that moment happen in real time. And the scariest part: this might only be the beginning. And see, this is where people really started looking at the situation sideways. Because once the trust between Tamar and Towanda allegedly cracked, everything else that had been whispered about in the background suddenly felt louder. Like the universe said, "Oh, you'll want the truth? Cool. Here's everything at once." And that's usually how it goes when family business spills into public space. You don't just get one secret. You get the whole damn vault shaking. According to insiders, and again, insiders who claim they've been around this family long enough to know how things really move, Tamar didn't immediately go public. She didn't hop on Instagram Live. She didn't start subtweeting. At first, she allegedly went quiet. Real quiet. The kind of silence that makes people nervous. Because when someone who usually claps back suddenly stops talking, it's not peace. It's processing. And behind the scenes, sources say Tamar was trying to figure out how much had actually been said. Who knew what? Who heard it directly? Who was just speculating? Because there's a huge difference between someone leaking a vague comment and someone revealing something deeply personal that could follow you forever. Especially when your life is already lived under a microscope. Now, while all of that was happening, the internet was doing what it does best, filling in the blanks. Blogs started revisiting old clips. Old interviews. Old moments that didn't seem important at the time, but suddenly felt suspicious in hindsight. People were replaying body language. Pauses. Side eyes. Even jokes that were brushed off years ago were now being reframed as foreshadowing. And once that snowball starts rolling, there's no stopping it. That's when a certain name, one the streets were already familiar with, got dragged back into the conversation. A name that had been floating around Tamar's orbit for a while. A connection that some people felt was too close for comfort, even back then. At the time, it was dismissed as industry overlap. Mutual friends. Coincidence. But now, folks were saying maybe it wasn't so innocent after all. What made things worse was that multiple people allegedly came forward saying they felt uncomfortable about that situation long before any of this blew up. Not publicly, privately. Friends. Associates. People who claim they raised eyebrows and got brushed off. And if that's true, that adds another layer of hurt. Because nobody wants to feel like they ignored warnings, especially when the consequences hit later. Meanwhile, Towanda's silence wasn't helping. No denial. No clarification. No, you'll got it wrong. Just nothing. And in internet culture, silence doesn't read as neutrality. It reads as confirmation. Fair or not, that's how people interpret it. And fans. They were split straight down the middle. Some saying, family business should stay in the family. Others saying, if it's true, people deserve to know. And then there were those who felt like both things could be wrong at the same time. What really shook people, though, was the emotional shift in Tamar. Those close to her say she wasn't just angry, she was embarrassed, hurt, and deeply shaken. Because when your own sister allegedly becomes the source of your public pain, it messes with your sense of safety. Suddenly, you're questioning every conversation you ever had. Every moment you opened up. Every time you assumed loyalty was automatic. And let's talk about the family dynamic for a second, because that's where things get even more complicated. Mama Evelyn, reportedly trying to keep peace while also protecting her children. Other siblings feeling pressured to pick a side even if they don't fully know the truth. And then there's the unspoken grief that still lingers from losing Tracy, a loss that already left the family emotionally raw. Add betrayal rumors on top of that. It's a recipe for emotional collapse. Now here's the part nobody wants to say out loud, but the streets are definitely whispering it. Sometimes people don't leak things out of nowhere. Sometimes it's resentment. Sometimes it's feeling unheard. Sometimes it's old pain that never got resolved. And sometimes it's simply somebody being reckless with information they had no right to share. We don't know which one applies here. But intent matters, and impact matters even more. As this situation kept unfolding, Tamar allegedly started feeling boxed in. Every move she made was being analyzed. Every appearance dissected. Every word twisted. And when you're already dealing with personal stress, that level of scrutiny can feel suffocating. Sources say she felt like she was being punished publicly for something she was still trying to understand privately. And just when things couldn't feel heavier, outside voices stepped in. Commentary channels. Influencers. People claiming to have receipts. Some legit, some questionable, some clearly chasing clicks. And once that happens, the original issue almost doesn't matter anymore. The narrative takes over. The story becomes bigger than the people involved. At this point, it wasn't just about Tamar and Towanda. It was about reputation, legacy, trust, and whether some lines, once crossed, can never really be uncrossed. Because even if apologies come later, even if explanations surface, the damage of exposure doesn't just disappear. And the scariest part, according to those watching closely, this chapter still isn't finished. Because when secrets start leaking, they rarely stop at just one. There's always another layer, another perspective, another voice waiting to be heard. And from the way this is unfolding, it feels like something else is coming. And this is where the situation officially crossed from family drama into something that felt irreversible. Because once the narrative escaped Tamar's control, it didn't just live on blogs anymore, it lived in people's perceptions. And perception, especially in the public eye, can be more damaging than facts. According to people close to the situation, Tamar allegedly realized something crucial way too late. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. This was about containment. Because when multiple storylines start overlapping, family betrayal, alleged leaks, outside drama, and internet speculation, you're no longer fighting one fire. You're standing in the middle of a wildfire with gasoline already spilled. And insiders say Tamar felt blindsided not just by what was said, but by how casually it was treated. Like this wasn't her life being discussed. Like deeply personal details were just conversation pieces. That's what hurt the most. Not the disagreement. Not the arguments. The lack of protection. Now, people have been asking the same question over and over. Why didn't Tamar shut this down immediately? And the answer, allegedly, is complicated. Because legally, emotionally, and strategically, reacting too fast can sometimes make things worse. Especially when you don't know exactly how much information is out there or who has access to it. Sources claim Tamar was advised to stay quiet at first. Observe. Let people talk. See who says what. Because silence reveals allies just as fast as it reveals enemies. And during that quiet period, Tamar was allegedly watching everything. Screenshots. Comments. Messages. Who defended her. Who stayed neutral. And who seemed a little too comfortable adding fuel to the fire. That's when the emotional shift reportedly happened. Because when the dust started settling, Tamar allegedly realized this wasn't just about one leak or one moment. This was about years of unresolved tension bubbling up all at once. Old arguments. Old jealousy rumors. Old wounds that were never fully healed. Things people smiled through on camera but resented off-screen. And once that realization hit, the betrayal cut deeper. Now let's talk about Towanda for a second, because her silence became its own storyline. No statements. No denials. No explanations. And while some people respected that, others felt it was strategic. Because when you don't speak, people fill in the blanks for you. And unfortunately, they usually fill them with the worst possible assumptions. Some fans started saying, if it wasn't true, she'd say something. Others argued, maybe she's protecting herself legally. And then there were those who believed the truth was somewhere in the middle. But what made things even messier was the timing. This didn't happen during a quiet moment in the family's life. It happened while Tamar was already under intense scrutiny from unrelated drama. Which made people wonder, was this accidental or was it reckless? Because timing can turn a bad decision into a catastrophic one. Behind closed doors, insiders say the family dynamic became tense in ways it hadn't been before. Phone calls stopped. Group chats went quiet. Events became awkward. People didn't know who could be trusted with what information anymore. And that kind of atmosphere, it changes relationships permanently. Now here's the part nobody wants to acknowledge. Families don't fall apart because of one incident. They fall apart because of patterns. And allegedly, Tamar felt like this situation confirmed fears she'd been suppressing for years. That not everyone in her circle wanted her protected, some just wanted access. And that realization, that's devastating. Meanwhile, the internet kept digging. Old interviews resurfaced where Tamar talked about boundaries, about feeling exposed, about not feeling safe emotionally. At the time, those comments felt general. Now, people were connecting dots that Tamar herself might not have wanted connected. And then came the legal whispers. According to sources, Tamar allegedly began consulting professionals behind the scenes, not to sue immediately, but to understand her options. Because when private information enters public space, there are consequences. And even if you don't want to escalate, sometimes you have to prepare for the worst-case scenario. But here's the catch. Legal action doesn't just silence people. It opens doors. Discovery. Depositions. Timelines. Questions nobody wants to answer publicly. And allegedly, that's what gave Tamar pause. Because once you go that route, you don't control what else comes out. And that's when another painful truth surfaced. Sometimes protecting your peace means swallowing injustice. And sometimes standing up for yourself risks exposing even more damage. At the same time, fans were divided in ways that mirrored the family itself. Some defended Tamar fiercely. Others criticized her for past behavior, saying this was karma. And then there were people who didn't pick a side, they just mourned what the Braxton sisters used to represent. Unity. Survival. Black sisterhood through adversity. Because let's be honest, watching sisters tear each other down publicly hits different. It's not just gossip. It's grief. Insiders say Tamar isn't just angry, she's exhausted. Tired of defending herself. Tired of correcting narratives. Tired of being the headline instead of the artist. And most of all, tired of feeling like the people who should protect her are part of the storm. And as for reconciliation, right now, that feels distant. Not impossible, but distant. Because apologies only work when trust still exists. And once trust is broken at this level, rebuilding it takes more than words. It takes time, accountability, and privacy. 3 things this situation hasn't had. So where does that leave us? With unanswered questions. With fractured relationships. With a family trying to survive another public storm. And with a story that still feels unfinished. Because if there's one thing history has taught us about situations like this, the last chapter never drops when you expect it. And something tells me, this isn't over yet. And this is where the story has to pause, not because everything is resolved, but because the truth is still moving in the shadows. Too many voices. Too many versions. Too many people speaking around the truth instead of directly to it. And when that happens, silence becomes just as loud as accusations. What's clear is that this situation has left real damage behind. Not the kind you clean up with a statement or smooth over with a smile. The kind that lingers. The kind that changes how people move, who they trust, and what they're willing to share ever again. Once certain lines are crossed, you don't just go back to how things were, even if you want to. The hardest part. We're only seeing fragments. Edited moments. Emotional reactions stripped of context and fed to the public one piece at a time. Somewhere in all this noise, there's a full story that hasn't been told yet. And the people closest to it know exactly how dangerous that story could be if it ever comes out in one breath. So for now, everything remains alleged. Everything remains unconfirmed. And yet, the impact is very real. Relationships strained. Reputations questioned. A family once known for standing together now standing at a crossroads. The question isn't just what happens next. It's who decides when the rest comes out. And when it does, because stories like this never stay buried, a lot of people may wish they'd handled things very differently.